Yep.
Okay, it's go time. All right,
There you go.
thank you. Good morning, guys. Okay, I kind of look forward to these Sunday lectures with you guys. Okay, I wish I could be there live in front of you, but this is close. Okay, it's close. I know a lot of professors don't do this. Okay, but I've heard that anyway. I absolutely think this is the best way to do it. I really do. Okay, when you just send out handouts and stuff like that, history becomes nothing more than teaching history becomes nothing more than information management. Okay, I've really become jaded to this whole principle of online education too. I really do, but that's me. Okay. Anyway, a couple of announcements. Okay, I'm going to rattle your cage a little bit here. Papers. Okay. All right. 22 out of 64 papers are still owed. That means one half of the class owes at least one paper. Okay, guys, you got to pay attention to this, and you have time sitting around the house now. Okay, so let's get that done. 1/3 of you owe quiz number 8. Okay, all right, now quiz number 9 will be due this Thursday. Okay, so you got to get that in on time. Get these things in on time. It's a pain in the neck for me to go back. Okay, to grade the late papers. This week in the mail, you're going to be getting your final exam. No, you got your final exam. All right. You can start working on that, but don't finish it. Okay. All right. And I do want you to write your answers on the pages and send them back to me in the mail. Okay. On today's email, this morning's email, I put my address on there. It's on the syllabus as well. It's the only thing I've asked you to mail in, and it should be just one stamp. Okay. But you got to get it in, and it's got to be postmarked by May 14th. That would have been the last day of class, the last meeting. That's the day you would have taken the final. Okay. You have 2 more lectures coming up after this one. I'm going to record on the 3rd and the 10th. Okay, all right, and that'll wrap up the course, and I'll basically taught you probably about 80% of what I wanted you to learn. Okay, so that's that. 2 more quizzes will go out too. One will be quiz number 10, and one will be an extra credit quiz as well. The extra credit quiz will really help you out. Okay, all right. Okay. Look for Tuesday's mailing too. That's also going to have in it a listing. It's going to come out around Saturday. You should get it. Okay, a listing of the thing. No, actually, probably maybe beginning of next week. I'm going to include the quiz number 9 in it, whether you submit that or not, so you'll know exactly what you owe, exactly what scores I've given you. Okay, if there's any question, it's just like looking at my grade book. Okay, if there's any question, all right, I want you to give me a call right away on that. Okay, and look for that too in the mail. Okay, all right. So that's it. All right, now we're talking about Leonid Brezhnev today. Brezhnev's Russia. And it's a little bit of a horror story, okay? All right, your handout booklet is page 58, Key Events in the Brezhnev Years. So I want you to turn to that, all right? Find that page, and we'll get started in just a second. All right, Leonid Brezhnev is kind of an enigma in some ways. He's a party apparatchik, A-P-P-A-R-A, T-C-H-I-K, okay? A-P-P-A-T-C-H-I-K. Apparatchik was simply a member of the party who was a guy who worked his way up through the ranks, okay? Shook all the right hands, kissed all the right babies, passed out the cigars to people that needed to be, attended the right parties, okay? Sent out the proper Christmas gifts, whatever it might be, all right? There's another name, too, that he will be associated with him, the nomenclatura. Okay, N-O-M-E-N-K-L-A-T-U-R-A, the nomenclatura, N-O-M-E-N-K-L-A-T-U-R-A. This is the upper level party echelon ranks. Okay, it certainly belong to that. Okay, all right. File those things away. These people are going to take this Communist Party, if they haven't done it already, all right, by the 1970s, the end of the 70s and into the 80s, and bend this party to their own personal gain. Now, I want you to think about that. That means implied and endemic corruption, all right? They'll be taking care of themselves first, okay, all right? First and foremost, screw the rest of the Russian people. All right, so Leonid Brezhnev's reign in a lot of ways is going to open up strong. It's going to be a very positive thing, but it's going to come melting down, okay, by the time he dies in 82. All right, and we'll describe that, and that's going to set the stage for Mikhail Gorbachev. Mikhail Gorbachev's got a lot of problems in Russia that he's got to fix, okay, and a lot of it comes out of the Brezhnev era. Well, it starts off good, okay, all right. Brezhnev called Russia a state of advanced socialism. Okay, what he meant by that was developed socialism, that's what he said. What he meant by that was this: listen, it's a pretty good system here. Okay, free medical coverage universally. Everybody free, nothing. Okay, all right, don't cost you anything. State pensions guaranteed. Rent controls for people living in apartments, and most Russian people did live in apartments. All right, food subsidies for those in need. Okay, zero unemployment. And that's not a fake stat. That's true. If they draft you in the army if you had no job, all right. And also too, universal education. That's something the Soviets were always pretty good at, is educating the people. Guys, that's a model state. That's not bad. All right. We can learn some lessons from that, but it costs a lot of money. And he's going to embark upon a weapons program that's going to cost even more, and it's going to drain the economy. He's also going to come out with something called the Brezhnev Doctrine, which is going to be a further drain. I'll get to all these things in due time. So by now, you've certainly had the time to get that book open to the page you need. His reign is sometimes seen as very stable. We look back at it now, we say, no, it's probably what the Russians call zastoy. You don't have to worry about the spelling of it, but zastoy meant stagnation. Start strong, and it's going to stagnate, okay? All right, so in 64, he had been involved in ousting Nikita Khrushchev, and he's now the chairman of the Communist Party, the first secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. That's the old GenSec position, general secretary. It's like the president of the Soviet Union today, okay? It's the all-powerful position. All right. He starts off by relaxing controls over the different farm production centers and the different Sovkhoz and Kolkhoz. He's also relaxing controls over the industries. They can set their own quotas, no problem at all. Okay. All right. So he's looking good here, but he does have this burr up his behind, if I could use that expression, about criticism. All right, he will tighten controls on censorship. He will jail people who have run off at the mouth against him, that sort of thing. One thing is just that not much has been written about. There's something called the bulldozer exhibit. Don't have to write this down. Okay, it's not important. But the bulldozer expedition was an expedition of avant-garde artwork. All right, and a lot of it implied criticism of Brezhnev and the Soviet Union. Okay, all right, he's literally bulldozed it. He sent in the bulldozers, he sent in water cannons and blew it apart. So you had to be careful, even at the onset of his reign, if you're going to criticize this guy. He's also going to mask a lot of the country's problems, but that's a point I'm going to get to in a little bit. So you're starting to get a sense of the enigma of Leonid Brezhnev. Well, all right, during his early years, 65, okay, 66, 67, all right, the urbanization, the cities are going to increase in people. Okay, the education's going to increase, religion's tolerated, some 5,000 churches and 1,200 mosques and even 10 synagogues opened up in Russia. Okay, remember they've been shut down during the Stalin's years, and Khrushchev never really did much about that. But at any rate, the nomenclatura and the apparatchiki are getting fatter by the day. Okay, they're making more and more money, socking it away. All right, cooking the books. Okay, all this stuff is going on behind scenes here, and Brezhnev is part of it too. Okay, you know what he collected? You know, I might have a collection of minor league baseball hats or even coffee mugs. You see me with a lot here. He collected cars. Cars. That's a little pricey. Okay, to collect cars in a country that is living, you know, with living standards in Russia were then low and are lower even now, right? But at any rate, I think that little anecdote says something. All right, 1967. Oh, by the way, gross national domestic product. The gross national product was running at about 5 to 6% per year. Guys, that's a good number. If you're running at 3%, you're okay. Okay, 5, 6 is not bad. You're running in the teens, you're big time. Okay, that's a booming economy. So you never want to have it flatline. By the end of the Brezhnev's reign, it'll be flatlined. Okay, that's never good. Well, let's take a look at some of the events during these different years now. And this is not on your note sheet, but it's a Jersey story. In 1967, Brezhnev sent his prime minister, Alexei Kosygin, to Glassboro State College, which is now Rowan. All right, my wife and I always argue about this. She was going to Rowan. All right, so she was coming into her freshman year that fall, and the Kosygin met with Lyndon Johnson, all right, in a major summit agreement. She always says it was Brezhnev. I said, no, it wasn't. She thought it was Khrushchev. No, it wasn't. Okay, it was Alexei Kosygin, all right, and she actually has a medallion from it too. It's kind of an interesting piece. All right, they give it to all the incoming freshmen and all the senior graduates. I guess every student there. At any rate, okay, this didn't produce much substantively, but it did, I think, this is a Trimble theory here, set the stage for something called détente. All right, you'll see it on your note sheet later on. Détente was an easing of tensions in the Cold War. We were getting along pretty well with Russia in the 1970s, okay? And I think it really kicks off with something they call the spirit of Glassboro, okay? The kind of cooperative, handshaking, backslapping, okay, camaraderie that would have existed later on. This kind of set the stage for it. So some others might disagree with that, but I think it's true. 1968 is a curious event, if not a bloody one. All right, remember the Hungarian revolt in '56, and Khrushchev sent in the tanks. Well, the Czechs are going to rise, and they're going to rise up in what's called the Prague Spring. They want more rights. They want more higher living standards. Okay, they want the money that's being withheld from their paychecks being given back to them in some form. All right. If you're going to run a socialistic state with high taxes, you better give that money back in terms of goods and services. That's the connection where people are willing to tolerate high taxes. You better get something back for it. All right. The Czechs rise in rebellion. Okay. What does Brezhnev do? He proclaims the Brezhnev Doctrine, which is basically saying that we will not tolerate capitalist, anti-socialistic, and he means communist now, governments anywhere in Eastern Europe, and we will support financially, okay, the preservation of of communistic / socialistic governments throughout the world, all right, but mainly in Eastern Europe. So the Czechs have risen up. The numbers, 500 to 700,000 troops are sent into Prague, 6,300 tanks, okay, 800 planes, and 2,100 artillery pieces. Airborne troops land in there, seize the radio station. This is a big-time invasion. So 1968, okay, the world began to scratch its head. Who is this guy, Brezhnev? What's he all about? All right, not a lot of people died, about 200. It was far less bloody, or probably about 10% of the bloodshed that was shed in Hungary in '56. But at any rate, it lasted for about 2 or 3 days in Czechoslovakia, and that was it. But file away the Brezhnev Doctrine. This is going to get him and his country in a lot of financial trouble as time goes on. The Sino-Soviet rift is continuing. There are some clashes along the border between China and Russia. That's what I mean by the Amur River. Okay, all right. You know what the Sino-Soviet rift was? We talked about that in the last class. And really, by 1970, the détente era has come to a beginning. So the United States is getting along with Russia. What does this mean? Okay, we're sending them a lot of excess grain, because their grain production is not what it should be. Okay, all right. The Russian people are allowed to travel abroad. Okay, and they go over to Europe. They go over to some came to the United States. But this is an interesting thing because it produces kind of an eye-opening experience. The Russian people who have lived in such paltry living conditions for so long, always with that promise of a better future down the road, they're looking at other people living in Poland and Germany, in France and London, and they're seeing their living standards. They have TVs, they have boombox stereos, big back then. They have nice clothing. This is, why can't we have this? All right, file that away. It's going to be part of the reasons for the collapse of the Soviet Union down the road. All right. At any rate, radio broadcasts were allowed to reach into Russia. People are listening to Western music, watching Western televisions. They'll see television people in American television shows. Okay, go from room to room, all with much more higher living standards than they have. They have a nice couch. They have a television. Wow. Okay. All right. We will also cooperate with them going into outer space. The Soyuz space capsule has cosmonauts, Russian cosmonauts, as well as American astronauts in there. All right. It implied a kind of equality and a kind of promise of stability that even Khrushchev had talked about, peaceful coexistence. I think this is the fullest fruition of it, although nobody's using that term anymore, but this is really what it implied. We're getting along with Russia. All right, now, Solzhenitsyn was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Who is he? I have recommended his book to you. It's a very short read, and it's a good one for your project grade. Okay, that's due May 1, by the way, guys. Okay, all right. I sent that out in your email this morning. Okay, the due dates. You got a quiz due Tuesday, and you got a Thursday, and you got a project due Friday. You can read that in a couple days, especially housebound like we all are. All right. It's written by a dissident writer called Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He writes, Cancer Ward. He wrote the Gulag Archipelago. He wrote a lot of things critical of the Soviet Union. He loved Russia, but he's one of these quintessential Russian writers, okay, all right? Long beard, okay, often sullen and morose, okay? He's going to win the Nobel Prize in Literature here, okay? They're going to later on expel him. Interesting, you know where he goes? He goes to Vermont. Okay, so that's kind of the area around Stowe, Vermont, is where he spent a lot of his years in exile, and he always longed to get back to the Soviet Union. And in the end of the day, okay, thank you. In the end of the day, Gorbachev is going to let him back in, so he'll die in the Soviet Union. But he's a huge, towering figure in Russian literature. Alexander Solzhenitsyn. I'm not going to spell it now. It's on your handout sheet. Workers' riots in Poland. Okay, more on that later on. First appearance of samizdat literature. This will bound to be on your quiz coming up. I'll issue it on Friday. Samizdat was dissident literature. A lot of it came from the Russian Jewish population, some of which from Andrei Sakharov and his wife Elena Bonner. Okay, they were Russian physicists, scientists, and they were also critical of the money that Russia was spending on the defense programs and things like this, and it wasn't filtering back down to the people. All right, the people have always been low on the priority list for the Russian government, their spending, etc. All right, well, they begin to have this literature come out. It literally meant self-published literature, okay, but it was banned literature. And if you were found publishing it, you were found writing it, okay, even found reading it, it meant a jail term, okay? He didn't tolerate dissent. This is what it comes down to. Guys like Solzhenitsyn was included in that. Andrei Sakharov, as I mentioned, okay? The Medvedev brothers, Roy Medvedev and Joris Medvedev. I remember reading Roy Medvedev's history of the Stalin years. Came out about 1972, and it's the first time that we became, in the West here, aware of the crimes of Joseph Stalin's. The secret speech by Khrushchev wasn't released to the West yet. We didn't hear anything about that. When this book came out in the 70s, it was called Let History Judge, and it just laid it bare, all right? But at any rate, behind the scenes, Russia was developing its weaponry. We didn't believe they were, okay? So we had the missile edge, okay, all right? Something in the neighborhood of about 2,000 missiles, 2,000 warheads, okay, all right? And there's a difference between the two. I'll clarify that in a little bit, okay? But at any rate, the Russians will work in the 70s behind the mask and the smiling face of détente to build up the weapon system to close that missile gap and even surpass the United States by the early 1980s. But this is costing big, big money. Money they don't have. All right, medium-range missiles with ranges of roughly, 1,000 miles, 300 miles, somewhere in that gap. I apologize, not knowing off the top of my head. Okay, all right. At any rate, I'm going to give you those numbers later on in terms of the cost, but this is starting to happen. We don't even know about it, though. All right. 1971, Jewish demonstrations in Moscow. Why? Because they wanted to be able to leave, and they had to pay an exit fee before leaving. Pay for their education that the Soviets gave them. This is basically just a scam, but many of them did go to Israel, okay, but only those that could afford it. 1972, Nixon visited Red China. President Nixon visited Red China, a huge event in world history, but the Soviets, with the Sino-Soviet rift, them not getting along with Red China, now they're bent out of shape. All right, why is Nixon playing up to the Chinese communists and to Mao Zedong? Mao Zedong's not dead yet. He's going to die in 76. All right, well, what are they doing here? Are they shunning us? Are we now the weak sister? Okay, the third person out, the third wheel. Okay, all right. And the United States, whether they wanted to or not, whether they were conscious of it or not, could always, quote and unquote, play the China card, meaning that we could get concessions from Russia if we played up to China. because Russia's fearful. We want to get concessions from China, we play up to Russia, all right? I don't know how true it is, but it seemed to work a bit, but it bothered both sides, okay? Nonetheless, Nixon visited Moscow, and he and Brezhnev signed the SALT I Accords. This is a breakthrough, folks. SALT I. SALT meant Strategic Arms Limitation Talks or Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. And they took an interesting approach. Without going into numbers, they took the approach of limiting defensive weaponry, anti-ballistic missile system. Actually had a treaty they signed called the ABM Treaty, right? Shutting down anti-ballistic missile systems. In other words, killer satellites and interceptor missiles that could shoot down incoming enemy missiles, all right? When you limit your defensive work, it means that you're more vulnerable to an attack. And in an age in which we referred to last week, mutually assured destruction, MAD, okay, what that means is, all right, that you're going to open yourself up to an attack in reprisal if you attack. So you won't attack, okay, all right? It makes perfect sense, although it's kind of an odd way to approach it, but it worked. Let's face it, both sides in the Cold War had the capability of destroying the world and certainly destroying themselves, and we didn't attack. They didn't attack us. Why? Because of the principle of mutually assured destruction. In diplomacy, they would call it a balance of power. In this case, it's a balance of terror, okay? All right? At any rate, both sides lived in fear, but still, it was a good way to go about it. So they basically, all right, shut down on, didn't shut them down, but limited defensive capabilities in SALT I. There will be a SALT II. That one won't get ratified by the Senate, but that will be a treaty on offensive weaponry, limiting that. All right, Egypt expels Russian advisors. That's Anwar Sadat. Egypt had, in the 1956 Suez Canal crisis, right, to get into because Russians weren't heavily involved in that. The Russians had bases in Egypt. Well, they were bounced out. Okay. Later on, Sadat gets assassinated by Muslim radical fundamentalists. Okay. Hello, here they are. All right. But at any rate, there are some riots in the coal-producing region of the Donbass, the Kaunas region. All right. There was a relaxation of access to Berlin. So again, on the outward side, it looked like Russia is kind of becoming more and more liberal here. Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago is published. Don't try to read all 3 volumes. I read the first one. That's a tome, about 800 pages, all right? But I remember when it first came out, okay, and it was basically laid open what was happening in Stalin's gulags, okay? It's a powerful read, no question at all, but it's a time commitment. 1974, Solzhenitsyn gets expelled, and he goes to Vermont, as I told you before. In 75, the joint U.S.-USSR Soyuz space program. This is really remarkable. Right? We created a space station up there, which is still up there, okay? But we had Russian cosmonauts and American astronauts in there, cooperating side by side, sharing ideas, sharing innovations, etc. And even there's a major summit conference in Helsinki, Finland, all right? But the issue that comes up there will be critical of the Russians. They're going to criticize the Russians for abuses in human rights, for locking up people who speak out against the government, for imprisoning Jews, okay, and not letting them easy access out, for also sending the tanks into Czechoslovakia. All right, they are a major factor in the human rights issue. Okay, all right. What is that group? Earthwatch or something like that that is formed about this time that talks about this. I forget that it's a human rights group. It's slipping my mind what it is right now. Okay, Andrei Sakharov was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts in regard to human rights. What do the Russians do? They throw him out. They exile him into Siberia. Okay, all right. And he's the guy that helped develop the hydrogen bomb. The Russians had that by now. Okay, they got it in the early 60s. All right. Brezhnev also had another problem in 1975. He suffered a major stroke, and he's not healthy after this. By the end of his reign, he's going to be basically a blithering fool, all right, forgetting his speeches, not repeating them, okay, forgetting whole lines out of them. There's one story, you know how true it is, but if you ever look at pictures of him standing, he's a big man, Russian bear, okay, standing before he died in 1982, 2 other members of the Politburo will be sitting side by side, elbow to elbow, propping him up, okay, all right? I don't know what else to say about that, but at any rate, 76 is not on your note sheet, but that's the OPEC oil crisis. Ask your parents about this. They remember lining up for gasoline for their cars, okay? OPEC was the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, mainly the Arab states, including Venezuela, which they were in there too. Nigeria was in there too as well. But most of them, Saudi Arabia, the Middle Eastern states, all right, they had a cartel, and they agreed to set prices at a limit production so prices would rise. Now, that meant that there was oil shortages, but Russia is not a part of OPEC, and they're a major producer of oil. What they did is step in, okay, to undercut those prices. Everybody's buying Russian oil. Russia was rolling in the money, okay, by the late 70s, okay? All right, the United States underwent a traumatic experience, though, with this OPEC oil crisis during the Ford administrations. I can remember vividly. You had to go get gasoline only on alternate days. The last number on your license plate would be an odd number or even number, obviously, okay? And you would go on odd number days or even number days to pick up gas, okay? People were hoarding it. The locks on gas tanks that are so ubiquitous now, they came in during this time because people were siphoning gas out of parked cars, okay? It really was true. Ask your parents about that. I'm serious, all right? Well, at any rate, Russia's making big bucks off this because they weren't part of OPEC, so they're producing like heck and everything else. New constitution, don't worry about it, but it did give some more rights to the Soviet republics, okay, all right? And Soviet aid was also going out to communist governments in Yemen, communist governments in Ethiopia, and communist governments in Afghanistan. File that one away, okay? We're going to conclude with that today. Even in Cuba and North Korea, this is going to represent a drain on the Soviet economy. Even though they have a lot of money, because of the oil prices, it's going to be a problem for them down the road, okay? That's part of the Brezhnev Doctrine, supporting these communist states. All right, 1978, Karol Wojtyla, the Archbishop of Krakow, this is not on your note sheet, okay, is elected into what position? You got 3 seconds. That's right, Pope John Paul II, okay, all right? He is elected Pope, and he's Polish. This is going to lead to a nationalistic outpouring. The Poles are so proud, staunchly Catholic country, okay, so proud they have, for the first time, a Polish Pope, and he is very big on human rights. He had suffered under the communists as a young man, all right, and he's willing to speak out against the abuses of the Russian system. This is, and Brezhnev can't put him in jail, okay, this is the Pope, all right. Deng Xiaoping appears in China, and he's a member of the Communist Party, but he begins to reshape Chinese communism, okay, this is after the death of Mao now, all right, Mao Zedong. He's going to now reshape Chinese communism into what we see today. It's really not communist, it's much more capitalistic, isn't it? So people in Russia are looking at this saying, wow, the Poles are getting notoriety here. They're having a Polish labor union, even though it's been banned. All right, the people in China are no longer living under a communist Stalinist system. Okay, wow, this is all part of a global reawakening. But in a lot of ways, this whole détente relationship with the United States was masking the problems of the Soviet Union. I'm going to get to them in a second. All right, what were they? Here they are right now, masking Russia's ills. Russian defense spending tripled that of the United States, but their gross national product was only 1/6 of what we had. They were tripling it when they didn't have the money to do it. They kept writing checks out of a bank account that was dwindling rapidly. Dropping oil prices in the 80s. Basically, it still is a one-product economy, oil and natural gas, that's it. Okay, those prices fail, they're hurting. And that's why the Soviet Union is hurting today. I'll give you a stat now, running ahead of the story. You know the state government budget in Putin's Russia is equal to the size of the state of Texas. That's it. It's not a superpower economically, but they let people know that they create the belief that they are, and it's all based upon oil. Okay? Look at oil prices now. They're only going to hurt even further. Crime increases. Alcoholism increases. By the end of the decade, picture this, 1/3 of each family's income in the Soviet Union is being spent on booze, on alcohol. And this is going to lead also to divorce rate increasing, all right, spousal abuse, child abuse, all the associated things we associate with alcoholism. I always tell my students, nothing good happens in a bar, folks. Nothing good happens in a bar, okay? All right. Male life expectancy dropped to an age of 66 in 1964. That's a drop, okay? But by 1990, it should have risen. No, it drops to age 62. Okay, in the United States, women are approaching the age of 80 in terms of average life expectancy. Males, mid-70s. Okay, late 70s even. All right, so look up those numbers. You'll see it. I'm right on that. 79, everything changes. And the Soviet Union, to prop up a communist government that was failing in Afghanistan, invades Afghanistan. Now, Jimmy Carter, President of the United States, saw this as an invasion was being a threat to the oil supply lines from Iran, from Iraq, through the Persian Gulf. It was never intended as that, okay? But they wanted to keep that communist government propped up. This is going to be the beginning of the Afghanistan war, which I'll get to in a few minutes here, but it starts here. How did the rest of the world react? Well, first of all, the 1980 Summer Games, not the Winter Games, the Summer Games were to be played in Moscow. 62 nations boycotted it. Okay, all right. It became a show that they wanted to put on to demonstrate how the Soviet Union was now open and flourishing. Okay, and it flops. They created a party and nobody came. Okay, all right. So that was in protest to it as well. The 1979 invasion of Afghanistan did force a summit conference where Carter and Brezhnev signed SALT II, which was a limitation on missile launchers. And there were silos and mobile missile launching trucks, okay, things like this for medium-range missiles, and also submarines, etc. Now, the United States still had the edge, but I'll give you some numbers here on this, okay? For example, missile launchers were limited to 2,400 each side, and to MIRVs, about 1,320 each side. What's a MIRV? M-I-R-V. Multiple independently targeted re-entry vehicles. These were multiple warheads they fired mainly from submarines, okay? An average American submarine, okay, all right, you talk about the numbers here, incredible. An average submarine, okay, could hit over 100 targets. I've got my numbers somewhere in here. Hit over 100 targets, all right, from the missiles it carried in a nuclear submarine. A nuclear submarine can sneak right up against the shoreline there and launch them from there and take out all those cities with first strike capabilities. All right, the United States had far more of them than the Soviets had. Well, Daytona's come to an end with the 1980 games. Now, you notice I emphasize summer games. I got to tell you a personal story here. The 1980 winter games you know about. If you're a hockey fan, it's a magic moment. That's where the 1980 Winter Olympics occurred in Lake Placid, and the United States Olympic hockey team, made up of basically college kids, all of whom played pro, and eventually they were that good, defeated the Red Army in the semifinals, okay? It was just a moment in history, okay? Well, I was a hockey player. I played college hockey and things like that, and my dad was a referee. Over my shoulder here, you might see a kind of collection of some of the stuff that he did. I don't know if you can see it on or not, but there's a check up there from Madison Square Garden. He was the linesman, one of the referees in the game that was played between the Red Army and the American Olympic team in Madison Square Garden, okay, on the eve of the Olympics. Now, the Russians trounced them like 10-2, but that set the stage for the American upset because the Russians came in overconfident. He never cashed a check. And back then it was a $100 check from Madison Square Garden. Okay, all right? He was a linesman in that game. Okay, gospel truth. Not blowing smoke at you. It's a very true story. But at any rate, also in 1980, saw the formulation of a major labor union in Poland, which is eventually going to lead in 1989 to the breakup of Eastern Europe. Okay, at least as it concerns Poland. A name enters the history here by the name of Lech Walesa. Okay, it's actually pronounced with an N, Valensa. Okay, Lech Walesa was a steel worker in the Gdansk shipyards, and he forms a union. Gets arrested, okay, later on becomes president of Poland, but he's very anti-Soviets. So labor strikes are occurring in Poland. Sakharov was exiled. Ronald Reagan, a hardline conservative, gets elected president of the United States in 1980. All right, 1980 is an interesting year. 79 is an interesting year. Some of the greatest world leaders came in. Okay, you had Margaret Thatcher coming in and ruling England. Okay, Deng Xiaoping in China, the Pope John Paul II. I mentioned him. Okay, some remarkable rulers are coming on the world stage here at this point in time. But what's happening in Russia? Right, they look outwardly strong, and they are strong, but behind the scenes, they're rotting at the core. They're rotting at the core. Right? The fringes, the states along Central Asia, they're rioting. Right? Not so much yet, but down the road. Right? Poland's in rebellion. Czechoslovakia had rebelled. Okay, things in Russia are breaking apart at the seams. Well, the Polish government, a communist propped-up government, declares martial law after those riots in the Gdansk shipyards and the formation of Solidarity. You got to pin some of this on the Pope, okay? Not saying he's guilty of anything, but the fact that it stimulated a lot of national pride among the Poles to have a Polish Pope, okay? This also means too, this invasion of declaring a martial law, and the fact that the Russians didn't send troops into Poland. Let the Polish government handle it. That's kind of signaling an end to the period of the Brezhnev Doctrine. Détente has come to an end with the invasion of Afghanistan. All right. So these things that stood very high during Brezhnev's reign in the beginning are now flaking away. All right. 1982, Leonid Brezhnev dies. Now, all right. He dies in November. Okay. All right, sudden heart attack takes him out. The Russians have an aging Politburo, a gerontocracy, if you want to call it that. Okay, the average Russian leadership in the late 1920s, the average age was 40 years of age. Okay, by the 1950s it's 50. By the 1970s it's 70. It's pretty easy to wrap your head around. 70 years old. Okay, all right. I'm 71. Oh, the stamina to run a country. Okay, so you begin to wonder here. Well, they choose a younger guy to be the next premier. He's a younger guy. His name is Yuri Andropov. Now, he's not that much younger, but he's not in his 70s anyway. He lasts about a year and a half, and he dies. He had promised some reforms. He never got around to them, but one of his lieutenants was a guy named Mikhail Gorbachev. One of the things that both these guys will want to do is root out this Russian corruption. The good old boys network of the nomenclatura. The apparatchiki are the lower level. They just work to keep their jobs. That's it. Okay? All right? Andropov dies, okay, and a guy named Konstantin Chernenko comes in. Okay, by the way, I mentioned the age. Andropov died at age 69. All right? Chernenko comes in. He's age 73 when he comes in. All right? He's going to die after 13 months. Accomplishes literally nothing. Okay, all right? Well, as these leaders go through the turnstile, they realize they got to get somebody newer. That means 85, they're going to pull in this guy named Mikhail Gorbachev. Now, he's next week's class, okay? Next week I'll be talking about Gorbachev and the collapse of the Soviet Union. Okay, all right. Your last lecture will be about Yeltsin and Putin. Okay, a few comments about that. There won't be a quiz upon that, things like that. It's just going to be the wrap-up lecture I would have normally given on that Tuesday in class. Okay, yeah. Remember, if you look at your schedule, I would have called a class on Tuesday, and that's what it would have been. All right. So I want to wrap up today with this Afghanistan war, Russia's Vietnam, if you want to go down that road. Now you're aware of this. If you saw Rambo 3, you know the details there. Okay, all right, joke. Anyway, all right. It can be confusing, but you've got a note sheet in your handout booklet. They'll be very helpful. Okay, all right. Page 60 has a Russian war in Afghanistan. Okay. Also, too, by the way, page 59 has 1979 as a turning point. Some of the great leaders of the world, and also too some of the events. Okay, that's big. Okay, I read a book that just came out about that being a turning point in world history. There's a master's thesis paper for you right there, 1979. You got the notes for it right there. You've also got some good notes on the Russian-Afghanistan war on pages 61 and 62. All right, 62 is book notes from the book Charlie Wilson's War. Okay, good book. And 61 is a term paper for you too as well. I said it was Russia's Vietnam. I'm not going to teach off this page. You read this yourself and you'll see it. But the comparisons between those two wars and the impacts they had. A lot of favorable comparisons, a couple of negatives there. Okay, I'm not going to go into it, but I will add one more. Point number 25, that Russian war in Afghanistan went through 4 Soviet premiers, 4 Soviet presidents. Also went through 4 American presidents for us, our war in Vietnam. So a lot of similarities there, right? And that'll help you. But if you want to turn to 60, okay, you'll get a sense there of the Afghanistan war, and it begins with the Brezhnev Doctrine. Brezhnev was going to support this this leader, okay, all right, a Marxist government under President Mohammad Taraki. Taraki's not popular, but he's done a smart thing. He's taken his major critics and put them in his cabinet. There's an old expression: keep your friends close, your enemies closer. So he's got in his cabinet this guy, Hufizullah Amin, Columbia University educated. He's also got Babrak Kamal, who's more of a moderate in the cabinet. Well, the Taraki government is in trouble by 79, okay? The local population sees him as nothing more than a puppet from the run by the Soviets. Afghanistan, folks, is a mess. It's called the graveyard of empires. It's been a mess for a long time. The leader of Afghanistan, even today, has very minimal power. He thinks he does, but the warlords locally hold all the power. All right, and you got to kowtow to the warlords. Go see the movie 12 Strong. It'll talk about the warlords and the Taliban and things like this. All right. Also, too, it's a country with a world-class drug trade. The world's opium supply comes from Afghanistan. It's the only thing they have to make any money. There's no oil there. There's no mining rights. There's some mineral rights, but nobody can get at it. Okay. It's a rocky, barren wasteland of a country. Well, why do the Russians want to get involved in this? Of what national interest is it to them? Right? Well, the Brezhnev Doctrine. Yes, they wanted to keep a lid on fundamental Muslim terrorists that sprang up in that country and would be on their border. I understand that argument. But they're propping up this government of Taraki. The people don't support it. Neither does Amin. He will launch a coup to take out, okay, Taraki. In the end, okay, Taraki and Amin both get assassinated. Okay, all right. Now, what that means is that Karmal is going to be in power. But to keep Karmal in power, a moderate, okay, Brezhnev is going to launch an invasion to prop him up. It's a massive invasion. It's called Storm 333. Paratroopers drop into Kabul, the capital. Okay, 80,000 ground troops are sent in, 750 tanks. Okay, all right, all to prop up this government. And now Russia is involved in a war in Afghanistan, and literally they've whacked the hornet's nest. Okay, all right. The warlords are against them. The local Muslim priests, Muslim mullahs, call for a jihad. Jihadis from all over the world, okay, come into Afghanistan under the name of the the Mujahideen. Okay, the Mujahideen freedom fighters are basically religious fanatics. Okay, they're also trying to use the warlords to gain power. They're using the United States to gain support. The United States is sending them money and old war-torn supplies. We're sending them old M1 Garand rifles from bolt-action single-shot semi-automatics from World War II. We're sending them some outdated missiles and bazookas and rocket launchers. The Russians, with their high technology, have the upper hand. The most devastating weapon, and if you watch Rambo 3, you'll see it, okay, all right, is the Hind helicopters. These helicopters have 4 high-powered cannons, okay, machine guns, let's call them, okay, and also as many as 24 to 32 missile launchers. These things are devastating, and they're taking out village after village, stronghold of Mujahideen after stronghold of Mujahideen. They're winning the war. But the United States needs to, if they're going to supply this thing and make Russia bleed, okay, they now got to get better weapons in there, and this is what the Iraqi government is screaming for. They do have their heroes. One is this guy named Mossad, who's 27 years old and controls the Salang Valley and the Lion of Panjshir. Okay, all right, he's having good success, but he's only one of the warlords. Later on, he gets assassinated. He gets to be president later on. He gets assassinated when a car bomb blows him up. Don't become president of Afghanistan. A lifespan is very short. Enter Charlie Wilson. Who's he? An obscure, minor Texas congressman, okay, who decides he needs to go on a junket. That's what congressmen do. They go visiting areas that that need attention. And somebody tells him, Mr. Wilson, you got to go to Afghanistan, see what's going on over there. Kids being blown up with landmines, okay? The Hind helicopters taking out women and children in these villages, all right? Yeah, okay, all right, I'll go. And he goes, and it's an epiphany for him, all right? I suggest you can get the image from Charlie Wilson's War, the movie, all right? But read the book. It's really a powerful read. He comes over there and says, look, I'm here to help. What can I send you? And the Afghani leadership jumps all over him saying, yeah, you guys are promising all these rewards and the support, and it's nothing, okay? We're spending about $300 million, okay, in supplies per month, okay? Later on, it's going to go up to over $500 million a month, over $600 million. All right, but at any rate, they need more modern weaponry. Charlie Wilson speaks to a CIA agent named Gus Africados. Gus Africados is a fellow drinking buddy and tells Charlie Wilson about a secret fund that the CIA has. And under the doctrine of use it or lose it, if that's budgeted, say they budget $100 million for certain things, okay, the money doesn't get spent, you lose that money the next year. I used to run recreation programs in the summer. I had to spend that money or lose it in next year's budget. I always think that's that kind of built-in waste in the system, okay? But at any rate, every January I might get a call from the Recreation Commission that says, okay, what do you need? I don't need much. Well, we got to spend it. Okay, give me some more field hockey nets, some more street hockey nets, some more basketballs. You know, I didn't need it. Well, Gus Africano says, what can we send over to help these people besides medical supplies? The answer is Stinger missiles. They were trying to use bazookas, that doesn't work. They're trying to use anti-tank weapons, that doesn't work. To shoot down these Hind missiles, small arms fire, that won't work. Machine guns, anti-aircraft guns, that won't work. All right, the Oerlikon missiles will, but they're $100,000 each. A Swedish missile. I recently read they were Swiss, but I think it's Swedish. Anyway, Stinger missiles cost nickels and dimes. They can be carried, run by 2 men. They weigh 35 pounds. Oerlikons have to be carried by a truck that can be detected and blown up, all right? The first Stinger missiles begin to arrive in '86. This is going to turn the tide. 333 Hind helicopters that literally, okay, what's the cost of a Hind? Okay, all right, I think they're $12 million each will be shot down by Stinger missiles, which send up a missile that's a heat-seeking missile, and it tracks you. So if you try to get away, it's going to catch up to you and blow you out of the sky. This is turning to war, all right? By '86 also, okay, Mikhail Gorbachev is coming to power. He wants out of this war from the get-go, so file that away. At any rate, there was a major Russian offensive in 1987. It's depicted in the movie Ninth Company. If you wanted to see it, I have it. I could send it to you. All right. Operation Typhoon in '89. At the urging of Gorbachev, they got to pull out, and that's what it is. The Russians pull out. The final tallies here: 14,000 Russians are dead. Some say it's double that, 28,000. Some say 75,000. All right. 500,000 are wounded. The Afghani people have lost 1.3 million, mainly civilians, and they have 2 to 4 million refugees. The country is in utter ruin. There are literally 640,000 landmines planted around Russia. They would drop these small little landmines, okay, from helicopters. They just spread them around like you would spread grass seed on your lawn, okay, all right? So these things are still left there. Kids tending herds of sheep even today have their legs and feet blown off by stepping on these mines. 8,605 Afghanis were killed by leftover landmines in 2016. That's 4 years ago. Okay, now, globally this is a problem. The problem with leftover landmines wherever they've had a war. So, what is the end game here? Well, the Russians pull out, leaving the country in shambles. We pull out. We don't do anything to leave behind something that the Afghani people can work with, build their infrastructure, build their school system, all right, build up their government, build up popular democracy. We just leave. Thank you, it's been fun. And now you get a country that's left their palms open saying, what the hell's going on? We were used. We were pawns in this Cold War between the U.S. and the USSR, and they were right. Right? Well, stepping in to fill in the gap of the warlords, the opium trade, the only way they can make money, and then a religious group called the Taliban. And the Taliban invites foreign terrorists, such as a new group that emerges in the 1990s called Al-Qaeda. All right? And you know the story from there. Well, what you don't know is what's happening in Russia next, okay? So we're going to look at that next week in the form of Mikhail Gorbachev. He's going to come in with this mess going on. You have a reading assignment. I want you to read this essay. It was written in 1989, okay? It's called Russian Roulette. It's on page 63 of your book, and it's got some of the stuff that was happening in the Soviet Union as Gorbachev was assuming power, okay? Gorbachev had a lot to fix, and he knew it. But where do you begin? It's like coming back to your house after a flood, and you say, where do I start? So I'll see you next week. Get those papers in, okay? Get those quizzes in.